Welcome back to Cheche. I'm Hussein Mohammed sitting in for Udwa Kamimo. We are talking about President Kenyatta's remarks that the foreign interests are funding non-governmental organizations with a view to influence the outcome of next year's general election. Just to recap for you, Professor Peter Koganja is sitting on my immediate left, the CEO of African Policy Institute, and also a consultant for UNDP. Next to him is Mule Misao, National Coordinator, Elections Observation Group. We also have lawyer Harun Dubi, who is a member of the civil society, and our panelists, Charles Odhiambo and Mutegi Njao. And Mutegi was just about to make some remarks. Mutegi.
Yeah, we were wondering from the professor here whether government is always right. That you were suggesting that if you belong to a civil society organization which is against the government, you should therefore be declared you a partisan, that you belong to a political party or whatever. Why is the government trying to refuse groups like this? In fact, you said when you were doing the constitution, you got money from outside. If the government in power was not interested in the change, would they have approved of that?
Now, let me also tell you that today, we're having a very, very big event, which is co-hosted between my organization, Africa Policy Institute, and UNDP. It's a huge, because it will be televised by Citizen TV. So it's that huge. We have invited the chairperson of the Ghana Independent Electoral Commission, Charlotte Osei. She's here. We've invited the deputy chairperson of the South African Independent Electoral Commission. We've invited key experts internationally and regionally on this matter. Now, this is a partnership between what you'd call a foreign organization and what you'd call a Pan-African organization, because that's what Africa Policy Institute is. Internally, we've invited civil society, Omar Hassan and others. Many people are there, opposition, government. The government officials are coming in. This is a dialogue of a country. I don't think President Uhuru had that in mind, that you cannot have organizations meeting and talking, that you are now curbing. That's a misrepresentation of fact. And I think when he was talking, he was not talking as government, because he was declaring that he is a candidate next year and he'll be fighting for this position. He was identifying stumbling block, which he thinks is an unfair tackling in terms of politics. And he said, one of the things I'm afraid of, which is not a fair tackle, is the financing of partisan civil society organizations to do politics in the name of
let's get this straight.
Civic education.
From all of you, let's get this straight. First, the government alone cannot do enough civic education for the election. Correct. We all agree with that.
Sure. Yes.
You also agree with that, Prof. And I'll read some of the fundings we gather. This is from the government. TV obtained this. Civic education foreign funding, it was to the tune of about 10 billion shillings. USAID giving 2 billion, UNDP 4.5 billion, UNDP. DFID 2.6 billion, Norwegian government 530 million, European Union 3.1 billion, Danida from Denmark 2.14 billion, and Finland 875 million. Now the programs to be funded is civic education, advocacy, capacity building, election coordination. We'll show you this shortly. And all the NGOs that are supposed to benefit from this will get a minimum of about 50 million shillings and a maximum of 100 million shillings. Harun, you are all agitated, and so many people are, with a blanket condemnation coming from the government saying all because President Kenyatta did not say it is this civil society, this organization, this organization, this organization. But do you also think that all civil society organizations or all NGOs in this country are for the good of the people? Could there be bad ones?
I would first correct you. We are not worried about blanket condemnation. We are worried about the condemnation. Because
of all?
Not, what you are saying has the subtle underlying image as if there are some civil society organizations doing bad.
I'm asking you.
I'm explaining that just as in government we have corrupt men and women who have stolen billions. That's why I'm actually not even interested in the billions you are reading about as figures. But in the principle Is there a necessity for civic education? Is there a necessity for capacity building and support of human beings to associate, to organize, to know better? No one can have a doubt about that. Does the government of Kenya have resources to support civic organizations and civilians in Kenya, or human beings or people of Kenya to know better, to associate and do civic education? No, it doesn't. It does not support. There is no budgetary support for civil society organizations, NGOs and others. In fact, government depends on part of these resources which go to the civil society organizations paid as taxes and as the money spent on what government ought to be doing. So the condemnation by the president, and I'm happy Peter Kawanja has done a 360-degree to come around and say Uhuru was speaking as a candidate, and therefore speaking with a partisan eye, and therefore humiliating the individuals that he named as heroes and heroines. He never named any heroine though. Heroes of the struggle for independence, by making a partisan, personal, reflective remark on a day we were supposed to be celebrating our independence and the declaration of our republic that is an open social democracy. The one thing I would like to state is the political leaders in governments across Africa keep talking about foreigners seeking to influence regime change, and that's what basically Uhuru was talking about, much more like Mugabe would speak about it. But I want to remind my President Uhuru Kenyatta and others that the regime is the system of governance we established in Kenya through the Constitution. People undermining the Constitution are actually the ones who want regime change. So those who are fighting freedoms, whether by saying we don't want support for civil society organizations in terms of their rights under the Bill of Rights, those who are fighting devolution are the ones who are actually seeking regime change.
Hussein, you were very clear in a question for the benefit of a big majority of our audience. Harun, are there civil societies that are operating in orthodox ways in perpetuating governance?
There are people who call themselves civil society organizations, but are essentially supporters of government and agitating the political agenda of government. And I will give you an example. When we were at the Assembly of State Parties in New York, discussing the situation around the ICC and the situation in Kenya, there were people who were registered as coming in as civil society organizations, but were funded and even paid for by the government of Kenya in their travel itinerary. Their tickets, their accommodation, their welfare was taken care of by the government of Kenya, and their argument was to say we are supporting the government of Kenya's idea, not necessarily the idea of good for the country or even the welfare of the victims of the post-election violence as we saw it. Those are people who would purport to be civil society or NGOs, but are really gongos, like we knew them in the
and so the president would be right to this extent.
The president is not right. He is actually opposed to the human rights and governance organizations, and Peter Kawanja has spoken clearly and eloquently that the organizations that support do development, do infrastructure, and with the example I gave earlier of Red Cross, he was happy with it. He says Red Cross does a good job.
Right, in relation to the election.
But I mean, Wakiri, let's be Kenyans and be honest to ourselves, very, very seriously, because we can get into partisan. And I thought, Hussein, you called me as an expert to elaborate a number of issues. There are no non-partisan civil society organizations. This is the lesson we learned from mature democracies like America. There are no independent-minded and so on intellectuals.
They are dependent on what?
The issue is that you are supposed to be objective. Objectivity is what is basically you are tasked to be. Be as objective. In other words, I can stand here and criticize openly the government of President Uhuru Kenyatta on the principles on the ground that I find it's messy and so on. Now, what President Kenyatta was talking about, and I'm just reading from my own analysis, are rogue civil society organizations that are perpetrating a political agenda and not the non-partisan agenda which civil society is assumed to pursue.
Harun, okay, so that we can move forward. Harun, you agree there could be rogue civil society organization?
What definition do we have of rogue or political agenda? Because human rights and governance are qualities of politics. When we ask that let political parties be democratic, that is a political qualification.
Let me be very specific on this. Let's talk about what the president said in terms of civic education and regarding the next election, and that some bodies could be used to influence the outcome of the next election. My question to you, Harun, is, are you saying that there could be none? There's no NGO or anybody that could be doing that?
No, my answer to you is this, that question is actually wrong. When the president says, if you are supporting the outcome of the next election,
are there rogue organizations or not?
I ask you that question. When the president says there are organizations which are minded at the outcome of the next election, therefore you call them rogue, you are wrong, because those that are minded on the outcome of the next general election are those which are saying, let us have a transparent, open...
My understanding,
I want to hear from you, Hussein, or Professor, or anyone here,
which ones are these?
What is sinister? What is wrong?
What is fine. And that is the other thing, Prof, again, coming back to the point of when Uhuru was saying this, Harun doesn't want to talk about blanket condemnation. I'm not saying that is the issue here, but that was like blanket condemnation without necessarily saying it is this motive we are against, it is this body we are against, and this body we are against.
You see, the concept of civil society, let's get there, is predicated on the notion that there is some form of neutrality. That's I mean, let's see, that's the theory. You read Antonio Gramsci. That's what he's going to tell you.
Neutrality needs to be understood.
Let me, if I could explain this, Dubi, maybe we could help our listeners, if not yourself. Now, it is predicated on the notion that there is some neutrality as per politics. That's what, so when we move to humanitarian sector, which has more NGOs or civil society organizations than any other sector, the concept here is massive and total impartiality in delivering humanitarian assistance, to the point that you can be giving food to these combatants and food to these combatants without being assumed that you're partisan to any. That is the notion. What President Uhuru was talking about, and which is salient across Africa, not only in Kenya, is a new blend of civil society organizations that are carrying an agenda that would be 100% political. And there are others who have a political agenda but are not basically aligned to any political formation. So the alignment to political formation to pursue an agenda was the basic concern.
But Prof, you agree that without necessarily or without giving us clear indications that ABCD is doing something wrong, it leaves everybody confused. And they have a right to complain.
I think the president also said something which we need to highlight here in the speech, and you have also read it here, Hussein, when you were reading the figures. He said, I think we need to, donors need to redirect their monies to institutions.
I'll come to that. That is another issue itself, and whether all this should just go to IEBC alone. That is what. So, Mule, you say something.
I just want to make a contribution on this, because I'm seeing we're going to lose this debate. It becomes an ideological debate. At the end of the day, we are talking about the instance of civic education, and whether it should be supported from outside or not. And Wakil was very clear in terms of that there is a deficit which is not being addressed by the government in the country. We have not provided for it. We have provided for a continuous voter education process. We know that there are quite a number of new things which the Kenyans need to understand in terms of the electoral process. Remember, we are now again working within a very contracted timelines. So much information with so little time. And therefore, for me, from where I sit as an observer, civic education, voter education, very critical. Where do we get the support from? The support is not coming from the government. And as an observer again, there is and I know we'll come to the issue of whether the money is supposed to be going to the IEBC. When you sit as an observer, one of the questions, and he talked about the issue of neutrality, is that you're supposed to be sitting in a space which allows you to be able to objectively speak about the process. Now, if the government gave you money and government is a facilitator of the process, there are people who raise questions in terms of you getting support from that particular government. And if you get money from the Electoral Commission, however much it is an independent authority, there are people who get also ask questions in terms of, are you working with them? Indeed, when ELOG in the 2013 elections gave a PVT report, there are those people who are not very happy with it because it seemed to identify, or so people said, to identify with what IBC had done. And therefore, so those persuasions, because of those persuasions, we want as much as possible to try to draw funds from a number of other sources. So it should not be just channeled to IBC? Of course. That should not happen.
Hussein, let me say this.
Let me have Mutegi first contribute to this.
Very well.
What I don't understand is this: why, if an NGO finds that the government is doing wrong, a civil society organization says there is corruption here, and then you find an organization that is going to fight corruption within the government, of course the government is going to oppose you, and the government will not be amused. So, Professor, there is no way any government in power will want anybody to say you are wrong, and that's obvious.
Now, I think we are holding the wrong end of the stick. The idea is not that the government will not have its enemies. That's why it has challenges. And that's why we have institutionalized opposition. And opposition is not just a political party. Opposition is seen in two forms: the political formation and the grassroots that support it. That's what opposition is. Now, what we are worried about as African scholars across the continent is that we are getting a third element in this concept of opposition, which is foreign interests. They may not be necessarily the government. And it is not just us. Even in the West, they are beginning to get worried. That's what Trump was raising.
But we are fast getting to a global village, and there is no way you can avoid this kind of influence.
I thought I had an important point to make before Mutegi threw a spanner into the works by bringing this. The point I wanted to make was this: there is no one in this world who is value neutral. If you are value neutral in terms of good and bad, if you are going to say I am completely neutral, you are possibly dead, morally and intellectually and spiritually dead. We must know good and bad. Institutions or organizations, that's why the Constitution has permitted people to organize in their various fora. And in such organization, they will require support from another. So you do not lose your independence just because of association. So the idea that you are receiving funding from a foreign government or a foreign entity does not necessarily mean that you have now become the brain cell of that foreign entity. You will receive support to do that which you believe in for the best of our
people. Is that how it works?
That is how it works. Let me conclude my remark so that we stop this idea of what Prof is calling Pan-African scholars who are seeing a new element. The elements come every day. Environment changes every day, so you will have new things to discover every day, and the discovery of new things is not necessarily the truth. What is there is that people are getting more and more knowledgeable. Government is becoming less and less powerful in terms of control of knowledge, and that's why it's getting more and more weak and concerned, and therefore becoming tempted to do dictatorial actions, such as the movement of the NGO Coordination Board, which should be the independent regulator of civil society organizations, It has been moved from planning to Ministry of Interior. I would like to hear Professor to explain why.
I don't know.
No, it has. It has.
It has moved, but I don't know. I'm hearing from you.
I know why you don't know.
I don't know.
On that note, we're going to take another break. Keep talking to us on Twitter. The hashtag is Cheche, and you can also text us on 22422. We're back after this.